Welcome back to another episode of the What We're Watching podcast. I'm Jenny, and today we're talking about Pretty Woman. And this is a very exciting episode because my fiancé Robert is here. Hey, Robert.
Hey, everybody.
How long has it been that we've been talking about getting you on the podcast?
I think since the first episode, I've kind of been half begging you and half just annoying you of, hey, let me on, hey, let me on, hey, let me on. And finally, because Megan has been gone for so long, I get my wish.
I know, we were like, well, okay, it's a backup plan. If Megan's ever sick or something, then we can get you on, and vice versa. If I'm ever sick, Brian, Megan's husband, can come on the podcast. And then somehow we still avoided that until now, and Megan's on maternity leave if you didn't know, so that's why she's not here.
So get ready for the B team, guys. Today we have a very special Valentine's Day movie, a extremely romantic, lovely, non-problematic story of Pretty Woman.
Robert, you actually chose this movie. Do you remember why?
I'm going to be completely honest, the entire reason I chose this movie is because the song that goes, Pretty Woman, and I've never actually seen the movie fully through and through, so I just thought, this seems like it would be a fun movie. I've heard it was a classic rom-com.
You guys have probably heard me talk about Robert a lot on the podcast, and I will say that usually it's Robert hated this movie, like the infamous The Holiday that he absolutely couldn't stand.
I'm sorry to any of the listeners, but I will stand by that till the day I die, that the scene of her running in high heels through the snow, instead of just taking a taxi, which we see 2 seconds later, a taxi can show up to the house. I'm sorry, I can't get past that scene, and that's kind of where my hatred will forever remain.
She was on a mission, but every time that Robert sees Cameron Diaz now, he's like, ah. But I will say, something that the listeners don't know about you is you actually do love a good rom-com, if it's done well.
Oh, yeah. No, a good rom-com is like an enjoyable movie. It's not necessarily my first choice of film, but like if you can, Hallmark films, not necessarily that one, but like you give me a good The Notebook or something, give me a good problematic main actor, where the love is like, ooh, that's not really what it should kind of be, but it's a good movie.
So like Pretty Woman.
Exactly, yeah.
You also really liked When Harry Met Sally when we watched it.
Yeah. Pretty much, I guess I like it when one of the main characters is kind of an asshole.
Okay. So I'm curious, what did you think about Pretty Woman in general?
Overall, I mean, I liked the movie. I thought it, aged maybe... To me, it showed like a clearly weird power dynamic that like existed throughout the movie. And it seems like he's almost like viewing her as not inferior. I feel like that's an unfair thing to say, but definitely not equal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like she does call it out in the movie though, too, where she's like, you're making me feel cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But I did feel like he was doing that the whole movie.
Even if he wasn't treating her like she was cheap, at the end of the day, he still thought of her as a commodity.
Yeah.
So I know I just kind of spent some time shitting on the movie, but yeah, I actually did enjoy it, and I know it's a good one. So what did you think of the movie? What's your thoughts?
I also hadn't seen it, and I think that's why I brought it up to you as one of your options. Your other option was Titanic, by the way. He didn't pick it.
Rose could have easily fit 2 people on the board.
Whoa, spoilers. But yeah, the reason why it was on my list was, number one, because you guys requested it, so thank you. I know it's a favorite movie for a lot of people. But the other reason is because it's actually been on my own watch list for a while, because I feel like it's one of those classic movies that everybody should see. I have a list of movies actually that I haven't seen that I'm like, if I want to understand the maximum amount of pop culture references, I need to watch this movie. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about this one. So I know we kind of already dove into our thoughts on it, but in case you need a reminder of the premise of the movie, here it is. A prostitute and a wealthy businessman fall for one another, forming an unlikely pair. While on a business trip in LA, Edward, who makes a living buying and breaking up companies, picks up a prostitute, Vivian. He hires her to stay with him for the week, and the two get closer, only to discover there are significant hurdles to overcome as they try to bridge the gap between their very different worlds. This movie came out in 1990, and it's actually a Disney movie, which I didn't know, because it's so rated R for Disney. It was originally supposed to be this dark cautionary tale about class and sex work in LA, but it was reworked into a rom-com. And I have a lot of details on that because I actually decided to read the original script this morning.
Yeah, tell me about the original script.
It was written by J.F. Lawton, who was a struggling screenwriter at the time, and he lived on Hollywood Boulevard, and he used to hang out at a Winchell's Donuts and see the girls walking up and down the street working. And he said he got to know some of them, and they weren't any different than somebody who does some other job. Duh. And they loved to talk because most people weren't really interested in their stories. So when he was asking them and being interested in their stories, they were very eager to share. One woman told him about a rich guy who took her to Vegas, put her in a suite, and then left a week later. And so that obviously kind of inspired him. And then there was a lot of talk at the time about corporate raiding, which is investing a large amount into a company, splitting it up, and then selling the parts. There was a lot of news about that at the time, and so he was inspired to take someone who was a corporate raider destroying the Rust Belt, and then he was like, what if they encounter someone who's the result of what they're doing? And that's what inspired the original screenplay, which he called 3000, after how much money she gets paid.
I do think the original script kind of has a much deeper intention behind the message rather than kind of the rom-com ending that we get. And it's kind of funny how it's almost ironic that a movie that's trying to talk about the nit and grit of someone's life and trying to struggle, and how the original ending is much more like true to how people actually do get screwed over. Instead, some bigwigs in Hollywood were like, no, let's keep this on an optimistic tone. Let's make it where, at the end of the day, the corporate raider, he is kind of still the hero. So let's make it all work out for everyone. And so I think it, maybe that's why I have some kind of critical thoughts, is like the original message behind the movie was a lot more of a better look at society rather than the girl gets with the guy.
Yeah, like he rescues her from the streets. Mm-hmm. He's her knight in shining armor. And they tried to kind of fix that at the end, but still he is rescuing her, I feel like.
Yeah, they try to humanize him more, and we can talk about the ending of the plot with how he ends up making his business decision, but I believe you were saying that the original ending is a lot darker.
Yeah, so basically in the original script, they're in the car and he's about to leave for New York to go home. And she just kind of is crying and really upset, and they have an argument and he doesn't really understand why. And he drags her out of the car, and then she won't take his money, so he throws it, and it like goes into the gutter, or around the gutter at least, and then he drives away and leaves her there. And then with the money, she like picks it all up and then decides to take her friend to Disneyland because she had promised that that's what she would do with her friend if she got this money. And that's the end.
What a much darker story. All right, get the hell out of my car. See ya.
Kind of more realistic, though.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and another thing, actually, that I remember about the script now is I believe her friend was sick and Vivian was addicted to cocaine. And so Richard Gere's character was like, hey, if you stay with me for the week, you can't do drugs. And she was having a hard time with that. And then there are rumors. Some people on the production were like, oh yeah, she ends up ODing at the end on the way to Disneyland, which is a very, very dark ending. But the writer said that wasn't true. And when I read the script, that is not what I got from the script. Although I kind of think that version is a little more interesting.
That would end up, I think, making the movie into a cult classic rather than like a rom-com that it is, where like people would be like, people don't like being depressed at the end of movies, and that would definitely be one of those kind of depressing endings where everyone's like, crap, that is life.
Horrible.
Yeah.
It is kind of ironic that Disney bought this and then took out the Disneyland part.
Maybe that was their entire plan. They were like, man, wait, we can't have someone associating Disney with a movie about a sex worker.
Maybe. Disney's Touchstone Pictures is their adult production company. I don't know how that works, but that's where all their adult movies were at the time. And so this movie, they were like, oh yeah, this is really adult. We want this in our lineup. But obviously they needed to lighten it a little bit for Disney. And then they got Gary Marshall attached to direct. And he's kind of the reason why the movie lightened up and changed and became what it was. And for those who don't know Gary Marshall, he did Happy Days, The Princess Diaries, Valentine's Day, Runaway Bride, which also stars Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. And we actually talked about him a lot in our Princess Diaries episode because he directed that, like I said, but there's also a lot of tie-ins between Pretty Woman and The Princess Diaries, which I was probably annoying you while we were watching this movie, Robert. Because I kept saying, oh, he's from The Princess Diaries. Oh, that's just like that scene in The Princess Diaries.
You would point out whenever there was a parallel between some of the actors doing like the same maneuvers that they do in The Princess Diaries, because it definitely seems like the director has a certain style in which he has the supporting characters kind of build up the lead actress. The movie honestly reminded me a lot of The Princess Diaries, but like if The Princess Diaries went the dark path instead of the princess path.
Something I don't think I knew about Gary Marshall is that he is in Hocus Pocus. Do you remember the devil character? He's like the guy who answers the door and he's dressed up as the devil.
Oh, yeah. Who's in love with the three witches are in love with him, right?
They think that he is Satan.
Yeah.
And so they're like worshiping him and he kind of just thinks they're like,
oh, great dark one or whatever.
Yeah. And his wife is there in curlers and she's just rolling her eyes. That is Gary Marshall.
Ah.
And his wife in the curlers is actually played by his sister Penny.
Oh.
I know, kind of weird.
Yeah, okay. That would be like how do you like approach, your family? Hey, I got a movie role for it. You want to be my wife? But, whatever.
It is a little strange.
I'm not going to judge their Thanksgiving.
But I do know that a lot of you guys probably remember that character, so now hopefully you have a face to the name of Gary Marshall. One thing I thought was really interesting is that they didn't really know what kind of movie they were making, and they were just making things up as they went. So it's not like they rewrote the script and then they were like, cool, we're happy with that. They actually were just kind of making it up as they went. And so they would do 3 takes for almost everything. They would do the dark, angry one, the comedy take, and then the whatever you want take.
Interesting.
So there was a lot of ad-libbing. They had a lot of fun on set, but nobody really thought that anything would happen with this movie. They kind of thought it would just be a straight-to-video movie. And they really didn't know what story they were telling, I don't think either, because they didn't know how it was going to be edited. And then the editing is what actually made it a story, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I wonder if that allowed them to have a few more of those kind of organic moments where you could really see the chemistry between them. And I wonder how much was the like dark take, the comedy take, and then the freeform one, how that was spliced together. I would love to kind of see someone who has all of the raw footage go and make the movie into like a dark movie, someone who like puts a Friends laugh track over it and makes it even goofier. Like, I wonder how far you can really go with the different cuts that they've had.
Yeah, I never really think about the fact that the editing is what makes the movie in the end. I know that the music really makes a difference in a lot of movies, like scary movies, for instance. But I didn't really think about them being like, here, we don't really know what the scene is going to be, so do it a few different ways, and then we'll take what we want from that. I think that's cool.
We'll get more into it when we talk about the scenes, but like think about the different ways you could perform the argument scene that they had. And if it was a comedy thing, you could play that in so many different ways. I think that the way that they did it was really well done, kind of in a not comical, but also not entirely serious way. But then if they had the dark cut, I would love to see like the dark cut of that, where maybe Gere is being very aggressive towards her and really treating her poorly. Like, how would that kind of make the rest of the movie seem? Because I feel like that was a big turning point where you started to kind of root for them as a unit together.
I will say, I think in the original script, he treats her pretty poorly, but I think that in the movie, he doesn't, even in the angry takes. I think at that point, they had already decided, okay, he's more likable, and we know this movie is going to be lighter in a lot of ways. So I think in the original script, he was cheating on his girlfriend, and they were like, we need to remove that immediately.
Yep.
And also, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but Richard Gere turned down the original script because it was too dark and he didn't like the character. But then when they lightened it up a little bit, he signed on.
He was like, I can be a bad guy, but I can't be that scummy of a guy.
I don't know if a lot of people would consider him a bad guy in this movie. Do you think?
Yes, I do not see him as a heroic character in this movie. I can understand why some people do, but I certainly think that he is a bad guy who goes from being like a corporate raider. He talks about how he had never really made time for his ex-wife or his ex-girlfriend. Very much so a self-centered character. And at the end, the way that they have everything end, it definitely softens him so that he kind of becomes more of the hero's journey into like, okay, he's a good guy. He's going to work with the quote unquote little people. But I wouldn't necessarily like put him as a great heroic role model character. I definitely see him more as the gray moraled protagonist.
Yeah. He actually kind of reminds me, I know you didn't watch this movie with me, but I know that the audience has probably seen the movie. In You've Got Mail, Tom Hanks's character is kind of similar to this. And I didn't really see that he changed enough in that movie. And I think that's one of my main criticisms about it. And so it sounds like you feel this way about Richard Gere in this movie. Whereas I don't know if I fully feel that way, but I can see why you think that. And maybe Richard Gere is just really handsome and charming.
I think it certainly helps that he's such a suave, attractive actor. I mean, imagine if the role instead was Weird Al. It would definitely have a very different dynamic of the movie of a kind of a goofy, lanky, not smooth talking guy going up and picking up a sex worker for a week. Definitely has a little bit more of a ooh type of vibe than, oh, this is my knight in shining armor coming to rescue me from this horrible situation I'm in.
Okay, I got you. Weird Al is a funny choice. I was thinking like Danny DeVito or something.
Well, Danny DeVito was more attractive, so I think that's going in the opposite direction.
Robert loves Danny DeVito, by the way.
One of my favorite facts about this movie is that they were trying to rename it based on a song that they could get the rights to. So they ended up getting the rights to Oh Pretty Woman, and that's where the name of the movie comes from. And in my brain, I had been thinking this entire time that the song was made for the movie and not the other way around, that the movie was like, oh, we got the rights to this. She's oh Pretty Woman.
It's a really old song, I think. It's a lot older than the movie, but that's funny. I was wondering how they were tied together. I kind of just thought that this movie idea came from the song and that they were like, ooh, Pretty Woman. That would be fun to make a movie that has that song in it. Let's see what we can come up with. But kind of the opposite.
Yeah, it turns out we were both wrong.
And we have both been singing this around the house for days. Maybe a full week, honestly.
As soon as you said, hey, do you want to do Pretty Woman? Every single morning I would wake up and in my head it would be Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman did really well in the box office and it was #1 for 4 weeks. And I actually think I saw something that it was in the top 3 or top something for 16 weeks. And I can't imagine it playing in theaters for that long. At that time, it was the highest grossing movie in Disney's history, and it's still the highest grossing rom-com ever. Or at least it was as of a couple of years ago.
Even more than Titanic?
Titanic is not a rom-com.
Okay. All right, actually, this is my question for the audience here. If you're going to consider Pretty Woman to be a rom-com, can we consider Titanic to be a rom-com?
Pretty Woman is funny. The entire time, they're cracking jokes and laughing, and it's funny.
Audience, she's beaten me.
He rescinds what he said.
Yeah. So would you like to talk about the cast?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's start with Julia Roberts, who plays Vivian.
She's from My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, Erin Brockovich, Runaway Bride, Valentine's Day, Eat, Pray, Love, Mona Lisa Smile, Steel Magnolias, and many, many, many more. She's from Smyrna, Georgia, which I thought was interesting to include because her character in the movie is from Milledgeville, Georgia, which is a smaller city about 2 hours away. And Robert and I are from Georgia, and so is Megan, so this is just interesting to us. Have you ever been to either of those places? I don't think I have.
When I wrestled back in high school, I went to Milledgeville, Georgia, and it's about as southern and in the middle of nowhere as the name would imply.
Oh, okay. No offense to anyone who's from Milledgeville, Georgia, but it's funny that they chose that for her character.
Yeah.
I have the craziest fact about Julia Roberts, and I'm ready for your questions about it. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King paid the hospital bill when Julia was born.
Here's my question about that. Was it like specifically for them, or is it just like all the babies on that? Like, did they know it was going to be her?
They paid for Julia specifically. They paid because her parents were struggling financially.
What a fantastic thing. Did the family know them before and they kind of like got into communication and that's kind of how that ended up?
Yeah, so basically Julia's parents owned a theater workshop thing for kids, and the Kings really wanted their kids to be in theater, but at the time there was segregation, and so they were having a really hard time finding somewhere that would take their kids. They talked to Julia's parents and they were like, oh yeah, sure, have them come in. And so they became close after that. And then because the family, I guess, was struggling financially, maybe there were some other reasons too, but the Kings paid the hospital bill for Julia.
That's awesome.
Is that crazy or what?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely insane.
What a fun fact. Anytime you join a new company, they do this thing where they make you say fun facts about yourself. You have to give like one fun fact. It's an icebreaker so people can get to know you. And I always dread those because I'm like, what is my fun fact? What is even worthy of being a fun fact? And what do I even want people to know about me? She wins, I think, at fun facts.
Oh, yeah. You just start with that every single time. Or you win any time you do 2 truths and a lie. Like
yeah.
You could easily be like, oh, yeah, the Kings paid for my hospital bill. Everyone would be like, oh, that's crazy.
Did you know that her niece is Emma Roberts?
I did not, no.
I feel like that's why I know Julia Roberts, because I was obsessed with Emma Roberts as a kid when she was in Unfabulous. Did you ever watch that show on Nickelodeon?
Can't say I ever watched that one.
You totally did. I feel like you did.
I could probably sing half of whatever the theme song is because I'm just like, in my brain, you say that and I'm thinking Unfabulous. But
That's it.
Yeah, no, I can't remember a single episode. For whatever reason, my childhood has converted all of the shows that I maybe watched a few episodes into only their theme song, but I couldn't tell you what the characters look like. I couldn't tell you the plot.
That's okay. I honestly think that's relatable. I think for a lot of shows, I'll remember the theme song more than anything that actually happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved Emma Roberts in Unfabulous as a kid, and I remember my mom was the first person to drop the fun fact on me that Julia Roberts was her aunt. And so this has been knowledge with me the whole time, but when I think of Julia Roberts, I think of Emma Roberts. I don't know if that's normal because I think most people probably think the reverse because Julia Roberts is their superstar.
Exactly, yeah.
Julia Roberts also dated Matthew Perry. Did you know this?
I did not know this.
She guest starred on Friends, and I think that's how they met, if I'm not mistaken. And he actually wrote about her in his memoir. And it sounds kind of like she was the one that got away. He had really fond things to say about her. And I think they only dated for like 3 months, but he ended up breaking up with her because his self-confidence was so low and he was so worried that it wasn't going to work out with her because she's Julia Roberts that he kind of self-sabotaged and decided to break up with her first.
Oh, that's such a shame too, because from everything that I've seen with her, she seems like she's a very nice, enjoyable person to be around. So I'm sure she didn't have that ego that he thought existed between the two of them, and in reality, if you probably would have just been himself, it would have been, a much better relationship.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
And then this is also sad, but he died on her birthday.
Oh, that's tragic.
That's really tragic. I can't imagine how she felt. Nowadays, Julia Roberts is married to the cinematographer Daniel Moder. They've been married since 2002.
What is Daniel Moder in? I feel like I've heard the name, but I don't really know.
He did this movie called, I want to say it's called Mexico. She was in the movie, and I think he was married at the time.
What is up with Hollywood having this constant tendency of married dudes or women who end up finding some like super famous actor or actress and be like, all right, I'm gonna risk it all, and then like 2 years later something happens. Didn't that just happen with Sabrina Carpenter and oh god, who was the guy? Barry Keoghan or
Barry Keoghan?
Yeah, that's Barry Keoghan.
Good pull. Good pull.
Yeah, it was just it's such a weird Hollywood trend to be like, all right, I'm finding my next spouse.
Yeah, it's really kind of awkward. And then I guess he divorced his wife and left her for Julia. But then they've been together since 2002 and they act like things are great and it's true love. So who am I to judge? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's the truth. Maybe true love is divorcing your wife when you're on set of your job to marry an actress.
Don't get any ideas. Do you know who I thought you were going to say? I'm shocked that you pulled Sabrina Carpenter out of your butt.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say Ariana Grande and SpongeBob.
Oh, God. Oh, I think I just put that in the back of my head because I still feel like that's just a weird situation.
I heard that Julia Roberts was actually the first choice for this role, but they also tested a bunch of other actresses for it too, because I think they weren't totally sure. Her career hadn't launched yet, so she wasn't super duper famous. They tested Patricia Arquette, Demi Moore, Laura Dern, Michelle Pfeiffer, and many, many other people, but I thought those were all kind of interesting.
I feel like Julia Roberts did a good job in this, and where it would have been weird to have like a Demi Moore is like Julia Roberts very much so played someone who's still childlike, a lot of like the scenes and a lot of how she acts and all that. I think it would have been harder to kind of create that realism with one of the different actresses that you mentioned. I'm sure it would have been a great role for them, but I feel like they captured magic by being able to have, her in that role.
If they were going darker, I think all those actresses would be good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting facts that I learned about it is that Julia Roberts hung out with a pair of prostitutes who were visiting a free health clinic where Barbara Marshall, the wife of the director, was volunteering. And that was how she kind of got into the role. She talked to them and kind of was able to like figure out how a prostitute would act in the scenarios.
And get to like humanize them a little bit more.
Exactly.
That's good.
Realize that like it's a person kind of behind the job and that they, still have the same hopes and dreams as anyone else in any other different job, and kind of instead of creating a caricature of a character, I think she did a really good job of like making someone who seemed like, this is something that they fell into, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I like that.
Then we have Richard Gere, who plays Edward.
He's from American Gigolo, Runaway Bride, and a bunch of other things, but those were the two things I recognized the most. He was the original dream cast for the role. He's who they wanted. And like I said earlier, he originally passed on the darker, more unlikable version. And even though Julia Roberts was already attached, he didn't know her. Like I said, she wasn't famous yet. So he was just like, I don't know how this movie's gonna do. I'm out. When they rewrote his character to be lighter, and when Disney was attached to it, they pursued him again. And Julia Roberts wrote, "Please say yes" on a Post-it note. And he ended up saying yes because of it. He thought it was so charming.
Such a fun little fact. Like, can't do any convincing no matter how good the script is, no matter how much it pays. It just literally came down to a little note that was, hey, please do this.
Mm-hmm.
That would be real nice to act with you.
Yeah, I thought it was super cute. And then while they were trying to get Richard Gere, a ton of other actors auditioned for the role. John Travolta, Denzel Washington, Christopher Reeve, Liam Neeson, Al Pacino, who actually did a reading with Julia Roberts but said it wasn't for him. And there were many other famous names, but those were the ones I pulled. And I just thought that was wild. Those are so many different movies, depending on who you pick.
Yeah, I think unlike the actresses, who all of them I feel like could have done a good version of their role, Richard is the only person who could play Edward in a way where it doesn't come across as like an absolute swarmy character. I think he did a really good job still making Edward come across as suave and smooth. And I cannot imagine a Liam Neeson in that role.
He was the one I was going to say I actually could imagine him.
Really?
You didn't watch Love Actually, did you?
I didn't. See, I'm thinking of him like in his action roles, in Star Wars. And I'm just kind of thinking of his
He's in Star Wars?
Yeah. Qui-Gon Jinn.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. I totally forgot. But now I just looked up a picture of him and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that would be a very different movie. John Travolta, I'm just thinking of him in like the Pulp Fiction era where he is a very good dancer, very like fun, smooth type of guy, but doesn't have that same Edward vibe that we get in the movie where it's a very kind of emotionally calculated person.
Guys, this is the difference between having a boy on the podcast and another girl. because I'm thinking Liam Neeson, Love Actually, of course. And then John Travolta, my first thought was Grease. And he's like, action movies, Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction was the last on my list of what I think of when I think of John Travolta.
It's the first one that I think of.
That's so funny. And then we have Hector Elizondo, who plays Barney Thompson, the hotel manager.
Who, when he appeared for the first time, Jeni literally pointed it out, was like, look, it's the guy from The Princess Diary.
Yeah, he is Joe from The Princess Diaries, which made me so happy because I love Joe. And he plays a really similar role in this. I don't know how familiar you are with The Princess Diaries, but...
Yeah, he kind of is that same helper role where he teaches the lady how to become a lady proper.
He's like a mentor figure.
Yeah.
Gary Marshall loves Hector, and so it makes sense why he was in The Princess Diaries, but he was also in Gary Marshall's other movies, Valentine's Day and American Gigolo, and there might be some other ones that he's in that I didn't catch, but I thought that was interesting. And I love when a director and an actor get along so well, you know?
Kind of like see something set for life. You're like, sweet, I can just ride with this guy because I know we can make good movies together.
He's like, I know the perfect person to play Joe in The Princess Diaries because he played a similar character in Pretty Woman. I like that.
Yeah. The last major character is Jason Alexander, who played Stucky the lawyer, who, in my opinion, is just such a good, scummy lawyer role. I love him. And every time I see him act in anything, he's so good at his role. He's so good at making his like kind of short stature part of who his character is. I love him. I think he's a very underrated actor.
I'm seeing that you have a thing for short actors like Danny DeVito and Jason Alexander.
Look, what can I say? If you're like 5'2" and you have a bald spot, that does it for me.
Jason Alexander is from Seinfeld. He's also Hugo the Gargoyle in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think he's done a lot of voice acting. And then here and there, I think he does other roles. Wasn't he in Shallow Hal, too?
Yeah, he was in Shallow Hal. He also played kind of that similar
Skeezy.
Scummy character where he was the best friend of the main character, and he ended up kind of causing the curse to be, spoilers.
Spoiler.
he ended up being the one that caused the curse to be lifted, and then at the end, like, sees the error of his ways. He also has a little tail in that movie, fun fact.
Talk about a movie that probably did not age well. Gary Marshall didn't originally want Jason Alexander to be in the movie. He actually fought it a lot because I think they kept bringing up Jason to him, and Gary was like, no, he's too short for the role. Finally, Richard Gere filmed something with Jason standing on some phone books, and he got the role. And I will say, they had already cast everybody else that they needed, and Gary was just like, I don't care that we don't have Stucky yet, we're just going to roll with it. And so it was very, very last minute that they finally cast him.
That's interesting that the criticism was that he was too short, where I feel like his shortness is such a good element of the character, having such a Napoleon complex.
I guess he got the role of George Costanza in Seinfeld because of Pretty Woman, which makes a lot of sense. And in later seasons of the show, a VHS of Pretty Woman is in George's apartment. Isn't that cute?
Yeah.
I never liked Seinfeld, did you?
I'm going to be honest. There's a whole lot of nothing in that show, which is kind of the whole point of a show about nothing. I get it, but it seems like it's a sitcom with a lot of sitting and not a lot of calming, you know?
All right, let's get into the movie. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
One night while leaving a business party in the Hollywood Hills, corporate raider Edward Lewis takes his lawyer Stucky's Lotus Esprit, which is a very fancy car. We were trying to figure out what the car was while we were watching, and he takes it to get back to his hotel. But he can't drive a stick shift, and he also doesn't know the way to his hotel, so he's in a little bit of a pickle. He finds himself on Hollywood Boulevard, where he meets Vivian Ward. Vivian is a call girl who is working the streets, and she's trying to make enough money for her and her best friend / roommate, Kit. They need to pay rent, and they don't have any money, so this is very important that they make money tonight. And Kit is played by Laura San Giacomo, and I think she did a great job.
Oh, she's fantastic. I wish I saw her in more roles nowadays even, but I find it very interesting that from the get-go you can kind of see the dynamic of Kit and Vivian's relationship, because Vivian actually did have the money saved, but Kit used it instead to buy drugs, which I think whether or not it was a reference to the original script where Vivian was a drug addict and that was a big source of her money woes, and they wanted to kind of soften it by making it so it was the roommate who had the problems instead.
Gotcha.
One kind of random fun fact is that the director actually made a little cameo very early in the scene where Edward is going and asking directions from a homeless man. It was dubbed back over by Marshall's voice because the original audio had really poor sound quality. So
so then he just pretended to be Richard Gere for a second?
he pretended to be the homeless man giving directions.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's the voice of the man.
He's the voice of the homeless man.
Okay, got it.
Vivian offers to drive Edward to the Regent Beverly Wilshire Hotel. He has her come up to his room, and she's judged by the hotel staff and visitors for her street attire. Edward impulsively hires Vivian for the whole night and finds her charming. When Vivian is back in the hotel room, she's watching TV for part of the scene while Edward is working. And during that, she's laughing hysterically at I Love Lucy. In order to get her, Julia Roberts, to have a genuine laughter, the director Marshall would actually tickle her feet during the scene. And that's why you can't see her legs or her feet during that, but was literally tickling her, getting her to laugh so hard.
I was kind of wondering, because it did seem kind of wild to me how she was laughing at I Love Lucy. I was like, she is cackling at this show, and I think Lucy is just like stomping on some grapes to make
exactly.
wine. And I was like, what is so funny about this scene? So that makes sense that she was being tickled. Interesting. Edward has the penthouse room in the hotel, but he's afraid of heights and he won't go out on the balcony to enjoy the view. And this comes back later. The next day, Edward walks in on Vivian taking a bubble bath and singing. It's a very iconic scene. She has these headphones in and she's singing. And I think Edward's talking on the phone to Stucky, and he's like, oh, it's just the maid singing. He asks her to stay for the week because he has to attend a series of business events while attempting to acquire Jim Morse's company.
One interesting fact about that bathtub scene is they had to use so much detergent in the bathtub to create all those big bubbles that the red hair that Julia Roberts had to be re-dyed after that scene because it literally would soak the red dye out into the tub.
Oh man, that sucks.
After negotiating, Edward and Vivian both agree to $3,000 for the week. Edward mentions that he would have paid $4,000. Vivian mentions that she would have done it for less.
I was pretty mad about this, actually. I was like, she is on the street, she can't pay rent, and he's like haggling with her.
This all goes to the power dynamic of why I don't think he's a good person. You know, he's literally staring at her like she's a child whenever she's watching the I Love Lucy. And
you think so?
Oh, yeah.
Ew.
The dynamic definitely comes across like he thinks he's better than her.
Yeah, I don't know that he views her as a child, though. I feel like it was more like he saw her, well, maybe this is what you're trying to say. He saw her innocence and her, like, love for life, and he doesn't have any of that. And so he admires that about her and how, like, spontaneous she is and not buttoned up like he is.
That's definitely, I think, a more optimistic way of looking at the thing where it's like, yes, her joy for life. I was kind of looking at it as he's looking at her as almost like, what are you? He can't really understand her.
Is it kind of like how I think we feel about Leonardo DiCaprio always dating 20-year-olds?
Yeah.
Where it's like a power dynamic.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I get what you're saying.
Like, there's not necessarily like anything lawfully or maybe morally wrong there, but it definitely comes across as anyone who's not in that position is going to look at it like, ooh, that's a little bit weird.
Okay, interesting. It's really interesting to get a boy's perspective.
I think the big thing that I kind of, where I'm like seeing it not as much of a rom-com maybe as you and some of your typical listeners might, is the fact that like I am thinking of myself more in the male role rather than the female role, and I see a lot of what he's doing as transactional and a lot of based on his own power dynamics, and you know, clearly he's someone who's trying to go to the top for whatever hole exists within him, and that kind of is evident within the movie where he like becomes a quote unquote, you know, good person at the end. But it definitely, like, I view him, I think, a little bit differently, where if you're like a girl watching the movie, you might look at the role of like, someone's coming in and rescuing, whereas I see him as a flawed character coming in and corrupting something that is already in a shitty position.
Yeah, I get that. I also feel like maybe there's something fun about a rom-com with like a makeover scene and
Oh
like she
yeah.
gets a credit card to go shopping
Oh
and gets
yeah.
a whole new wardrobe and new everything. And I like that. Even though I know that it's kind of messed up, I like it.
Now my question, actually, now that we're kind of on the subject, do you think they could have done a Pretty Man if they flipped it the opposite way, where you had some beautiful rich woman who came into the streets to some male juggalo?
Is that what a gigolo is?
Yeah.
I think a gender swapped version would be interesting. I'm tired of Hollywood doing gender swapped things though. I feel like it's more interesting when they just make the movie about that in the first place. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Oh yeah.
if you want to have the movie Holes but about girls, which is I think they're making a TV show or something now. It's like a spinoff. I think it's going to be cute. I'm probably going to watch it and I'm probably going to like it. But it's kind of like the Ghostbusters with women. I almost just wish that they would make a new story with a bunch of powerful women who are doing something really cool and not just try to gender swap the men who already exist and try to like fit them in that role. So I feel like if they gender swapped this, and I think they would be trying too hard to stick to the formula of Pretty Woman versus actually exploring what it might be like to be this male escort and this woman who has a lot of money and is paying for him for the week. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. I think kind of on that note, movies that are inspired by something rather than direct remakes, I think would be kind of the way to look at it, where it's like the spiritual successor to Pretty Woman, but not necessarily like a one-to-one replication of it, because you are going to be trying to fight against people's nostalgia towards something if you're saying that it's like the direct successor to Pretty Woman. Like, you're going to be dealing with a lot of people who already have a lot of thoughts towards Pretty Woman, where they look at it as a very good, complete story. And I think opening it up to a sequel that isn't necessary will just kind of make people initially think, I don't want this. Like, you're starting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah. I have two thoughts, though. One is that Ocean's 8 was actually really good.
I was literally about to reference that. I was going to say, because you can do it.
You can do it. And they did a good job. And I think it's because they made it different enough. It's still like a heist story, but with these women characters that I don't think were trying to be replications of previous characters, right?
Yeah, no.
They were new.
It was, I believe, a new story. I think it's kind of similar to The Hangover and then Bridesmaids, where they both have very similar concepts of a story. It's actually done in a really good way in both of those stories, because instead of taking, a one-to-one, like, I'm not going to make the female version of The Hangover, you take the concept of the story and then make it unique for what would happen in that role.
Yeah, like you develop the characters in their own way.
Exactly.
Okay, the second thing I was going to say is, did you know that Stephenie Meyer wrote a gender-swapped version of Twilight, and it's a published novel?
That's very hoa, hoa, hoa.
Hoa, hoa.
See, that would even be creep. Well, first off, how does the whole Bella having a baby and then that baby ended up being like a creepy love thing for, what's his name? Jacob.
I don't actually know. I think it's only the first book rewritten, if I'm not mistaken. It kind of reminds me of like fan fiction for yourself if you're gender swapping your own book. It would be so fun, though, if they turned that into a movie. I would watch that in a heartbeat. I think that would be so fun to watch.
As long as it's like, if they're trying to do it as equally campy and kind of goofy as the first Twilight movie was, then I think it could be good. But like,
no Twilight slander here, sir.
Twilight is the best movie ever. 10 out of 10. They've never done a single mistake, not a single cringy moment.
I'm pretty sure that when we did our episode on Twilight, Megan and I did talk about all the cringy moments that just didn't age well with our growing up. But yeah, anyway, that was a tangent, but I thought that was funny. Yeah. So they agree on the $3,000, and then he also gives her money to buy more conservative clothes. So Vivian goes shopping on Rodeo Drive, and the saleswomen turn her away at a boutique and tell her that she won't fit in the clothes that they have, which basically she looks unsophisticated to them, and so they're super snobby and rude to her. And so she goes back to the hotel kind of dejected. And when she tries to go back to her room, the hotel manager, Barney, gives her a hard time. He basically insinuates that this isn't a hotel for prostitution, but he's willing to look the other way for Edward and won't see her back in this hotel again when Edward leaves. She tells him that she tried to buy more appropriate clothes, but the saleswomen were rude to her. And then this is where Barney turns into Joe from The Princess Diaries. He calls his saleswoman friend Bridget, who's very kind, and helps Vivian find a cocktail dress for that evening's business dinner. So he saves the day. And then he teaches her table etiquette. She's just so charming that when she's vulnerable for a second, he just wants to help her immediately. Maybe it's that innocent childlike thing that she has going on that just softens people to her, because I think everyone throughout this movie really likes her.
I think she does a really good job playing someone who doesn't have a mean bone in their body, and you can instantly see that, where like she is not going to come at you with any sort of aggression, and so that immediately makes you like endear towards her. And I think she did a really good job. Yeah, the innocent role, but also she is a genuinely good person put in a set of really crappy circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
When Edward turns, he is astounded by Vivian's transformation and doesn't recognize her at first. At dinner, he introduces Vivian to Morris and his grandson David. Vivian struggles with which fork to use and launches some escargot across the room, which the waiter catches and simply says it happens all the time. In that moment, I believe she endears herself to the Morrises and kind of makes both of them, but especially David, kind of realize, she's a good person. And really, she brought some positive energy to that meeting.
I got really excited when I saw this scene because it is the same waiter from The Princess Diaries. In The Princess Diaries, when Mia breaks a glass, the waiter also says it happens all the time as a reference to this movie. And I thought that was so cute. And I think we talked about this in our Princess Diaries episode, so I already knew it was coming. But I didn't have the context. I didn't know the reference. I just knew it was from Pretty Woman. So to now fit those puzzle pieces together, I was super excited.
Bet it must be fun as a director to be able to like throw in a bunch of little Easter eggs and be like, maybe no one will notice this, but someone will.
Yeah, like it's like Taylor Swift. Have you seen my other movies? Gary Marshall is Taylor Swift.
That's, one person to compare it to.
And they also have the same green palette cleanser ice cream stuff. I'm not fancy, so I don't know what it is. But in The Princess Diaries, it's a pretty iconic scene where she puts it in her mouth too quickly and it's really cold. And then she's struggling to be proper. And in this movie, I saw the green palette cleanser and I was like, perfect. It's like The Princess Diaries.
I think we all know that it's actually mint chocolate ice cream and that Jeni refuses to admit it because of her hatred towards mint chocolate ice cream. But that's truly the palate cleansing ice cream.
I'm going to lose some friends now that you told them that. The Morses are charmed by Vivian at dinner, but ultimately the dinner doesn't go well because they're really unhappy with Edward's plan to dismantle their company, obviously.
On an aside here, and I don't know if this is just because Edward has kind of been dealing with some emotional instability over the past couple days, but he's a really bad negotiator. And like he did a really bad job going in and trying to smooth over the deal because really he just went in. His date ended up being the only positive behind it. And he ended up kind of wrecking that potential business deal just by trying to play hardball. So I'm going to say that Edward is probably just a Nepo baby, considering that his dad was the original founder of this company and that his negotiation skills are actually subpar. That's my hot take for the movie.
And Vivian is actually the businesswoman?
Yeah, at the end of the day, she should have been negotiating all these deals because she makes people like her, And Edward, is he a likable person? No. You and I disagree if he's a likable person. With how hot he is, he should be likable.
Okay.
After the dinner goes terribly, Edward ends up opening up to Vivian, and he shares about his personal life and business life, including his estranged relationship with his late father and how his father had recently passed. He then excuses himself to go down and play the piano. After a while, Vivian comes down to find him, and he says he only plays for strangers. He ends up telling everyone in the room to leave, and they end up having sex on the piano, which total power move. being like telling an entire group of strangers, hey, get out of this room right now.
I think these were the moments that I actually didn't like about him, were like him just feeling entitled to tell 20 people in the room to leave versus just going somewhere else with Vivian.
Yeah, and he admits that a scene earlier or a few seconds earlier that it's all strangers. So unless these people know who this guy is, it's just some asshole who's been playing beautiful piano. And then he tells all of you, hey, get out of here.
Can you
I know
leave?
you're still, finishing your drink and such, but I need to go have sex on this piano right now.
I think it was just for vibes, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And from what I was reading, that piano scene itself was completely improv. Richard Gere would talk to the director, and they were mentioning what he would do whenever he would stay at a hotel. And he would mention that he would go when he was jet lagged and play the piano. So that scene kind of naturally occurred and ended up being, I think, one of the more iconic love scenes in the movie.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's kind of cool that it was just kind of ad-libbed and based on the actor's experience. I like that.
Based on his own ability to play the piano.
Yeah, also that's helpful. Edward takes Vivian along as his date to a polo match. I assume this is the next day. And when Stuckey sees Vivian talking to David Morse, the grandson with the company, he tells Edward that he's suspicious that she's a corporate spy. So Edward has to tell him, no, she's a prostitute that I hired. And now that he knows Vivian's true background, Stuckey, who's married, by the way, goes to talk to her and crudely asks her for her services while she's alone. And she is so upset by this, obviously.
They return to Edward's penthouse suite, and Vivian has been extremely upset in the car ride there, and eventually admits to Edward that she's upset that he exposed her as a prostitute to his friend. He apologizes, admitting that he was just jealous of Vivian talking to David, which I think further goes into the fact that he is not viewing people as people, and instead he immediately allows his jealousy to then devalue her as a human.
Yeah, he's toxic.
I'm slowly going to work my way into making everyone realize that he's actually a villain, not a hero.
He's like, you're talking to this other guy, I'm jealous, so I'm gonna tell this lawyer friend of mine who sucks that you're a prostitute.
They end up smoothing things over, and Edward decides to take Vivian on a private jet to San Francisco Opera. During that scene is the iconic red dress that she wears, and one interesting fact is that red dress almost ended up being black. The studio kept going back and forth with the costume designer, Marilyn Vance, and they just tested so many different colors for the one dress till they were able to find the right shade, and everyone went with that direction of red.
Honestly, smart that they would go with red because it needed to make a statement, and she did. She had already worn a black dress, like the first reveal that we had with her, so this makes sense.
It's interesting, too, how it doesn't convey, if it was just a more subtle black dress, it might not have conveyed that same amount of like kind of power and all that you see as part of her development. So I agree with the costume designer. She is quoted as saying, "The studio really wanted black, but I knew it had to be red. Before the decision was made, we ended up having to create 3 different dresses. We took every color and shot her. Poor Julia had to sit for so many color tests, all for that one dress. Finally, I was able to get the right shade and convince everyone to go my direction."
Interesting.
One other interesting bit about that scene is where Edward is giving that extremely fancy necklace to Julia Roberts. He snaps it shut, and that was a complete improvised scene. So her laughing reaction is all genuine, and it was all kind of part of the atmosphere that Gary Marshall had created by trying to allow the actors and actresses to kind of improvise a lot on their own and create more natural chemistry.
That's so cute. I love that. I actually kind of love when directors and writers are okay with the actors ad-libbing and improving, because I think you get some really interesting things like this. This moment is very famous, I feel like.
Yep.
Because it's so genuine and unique. I don't think anyone would write it that way. So many movies that we've covered on the podcast, we actually say the exact opposite, where the director is also the writer, and they are very anti you changing any line. So in Lady Bird, Greta Gerwig is actually one of them. I imagine she was that way for Barbie too when she directed that. Aaron Sorkin is another one who's famous for that, and Shonda Rhimes. and Amy Sherman Palladino, who did Gilmore Girls.
Ah.
Just a fun fact.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think actually, for me, the scenes where it's improv are almost where I like Edward the most, where he comes across as the most. He is a good character that like is probably just dealing with a lot of the struggles of his father passing, of realizing that no woman has actually been able to love him because he's emotionally set himself off. So I feel like those are the moments where, at least to me, it conveys him as more of a tragic character than where I kind of see him again as the villain.
So when he is just Richard Gere, you like him?
Yeah, turns out I just like suave actors like Danny DeVito.
Oh, yes. So like Robert was saying, Edward takes Vivian by private jet to see La Traviata at the San Francisco Opera. And I didn't know this, but it's actually a story about a prostitute who falls in love with a wealthy man. Vivian is super moved by this performance, and she ends up that night breaking her no kissing rule before having sex with Edward. In the past, she had said that kissing was too personal, and so she doesn't kiss any of her clients, but she broke the rule, and now we know that she's feeling something.
And then, in a very non-toxic way, after he's all fallen asleep, this woman who's known this man for a few days whispers, "I love you," to him, at which, when Jenny and I both heard that, we both went, ah!
We were like, you love him? How do you know? That scene is actually in the original script, the dark version of the script, too. She does say, "I love you," as he's falling asleep. And I think it's more to like test it out to see if she means it, you know? I think that's interesting that that's a line that they kept.
Definitely seems like it has a different connotation in the original script of like, she's just trying to pull one on him, where in this one it's like, wait, do I love you?
Oh, no, actually, in the original script, I probably didn't explain it in a great way because I'm not super great with words. But basically, she was saying, "I love you," because she did love him.
Ah.
And he was asleep already, and she was kind of just trying to like say it out loud.
Oh.
But she knew as she said it that he would never love her because she was just someone he hired.
Oh, that makes it even more tragic when you think about that. Plays into the power dynamic issue that's the entire movie.
Yeah, but in this movie, obviously, it's like a mutual thing, which is great.
He loves her back.
The week is almost finished, and Edward offers to get Vivian a condo in New York and an allowance, promising to visit her regularly. But Vivian is offended, feeling like he's now treating her like a prostitute. She shares her childhood fantasy of being rescued by a knight on a white steed.
I feel like this is the one scene where Edward kind of like realizes that money really isn't the key thing for success or power in this sort of situation. And that kind of leads into the next scene where he meets with Morris, and being influenced by Vivian, chooses not to completely consume and break apart his company, but instead he wants to work with him to help build ships and increase the work that they're doing and really just do a good job. Instead of going in a money-hungry hunter, he goes in instead of realizes his humanity.
I also think it's really interesting here. Both of us caught this when he's making this deal with Morse. You can tell that he kind of sees his father in Morse because Morse is kind of an older man. And it's like for a second, I don't know if he feels, yeah, he just views Morse as a father figure. And this is like a way for him to kind of connect with his dad again.
Oh, yeah. From kind of how he described his lack of relationship with his father and all that, it seems like when Morse put his hand on him and was basically like saying how he's proud of him, it was like all the validation that millions of dollars could not have given him.
That's right. Morse says, "I'm proud of you."
Yeah.
And that really touched him.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he had heard that from his father. Wow. So deep.
Meanwhile, on the opposite end of things, you have Stucky, who is completely furious about Edward's new direction, and it's costing him a fortune. He mentioned they had put thousands of man hours in on this, and he decides to go to the hotel to confront Edward. Instead of finding Edward there, Stucky finds Vivian. He first tries to be a skis and hit on her a little bit, but quickly becomes violent, hits her, and then attempts to rape her. Edward arrives, pulls Stucky off of Vivian, and punches him in the face, and immediately fires him.
Satisfying.
Yeah,
That was a horrible scene.
Absolutely terrible. That it kind of goes to show that these people in these power positions just think, I can do whatever I want to her. I think a reoccurring theme that I've noticed is the people in power don't view her as a person, whereas like, you know, the hotel workers, the people that she actually gets to know realize her humanity and how good of a person she is.
I also think it's probably just true. It's like a stigma. If she's a prostitute, then people feel entitled to her body because that's her job.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
they don't realize that she gets to choose and it's her body still, and that she doesn't want it from them.
Yep.
After this all goes down, Edward asks Vivian to stay with him for one more night, but only if she wants to, not because he's paying her. She gently refuses and leaves. She returns to her apartment hotel, and she has decided that she's moving to San Francisco to get a new job and finish her high school degree, which I was like, good for her. I kind of thought that's how it was going to end. Like her going to just change her life around herself on nobody else's dime. She gives Kit some money and tells her that she has a lot of potential, which makes Kit teary-eyed because she's obviously never heard that before. Kit ends up leaving sex work and enrolls in beauty classes, and then she starts trying to convert the other prostitutes on the street, which I thought was really funny and cute that she was doing that.
So before she leaves, Vivian is waiting in her apartment for the bus, and Edward reroutes his chauffeur to go to her apartment instead of going to the airport to New York City. Which, side note, shout out to Barney for being absolutely forward thinking and knowing that by giving Vivian the chauffeur a ride home, he could still set Edward up for success, because he knew that there would be drama in that relationship.
Oh yeah, it was the same chauffeur, so he knew that the guy knew where Vivian lived and could take him there.
Yeah, I hope at the end of the day he got the biggest tip out of anyone, because he deserved the money.
I agree. Go Daryl.
When Edward arrives at her hotel, he starts blasting opera music. He then decides to climb out of the limo's sunroof and start climbing the fire escape to rescue Vivian as the knight in shining armor. While he's starting to climb, he gets a little bit scared of the height itself, so Vivian kind of comes down to meet him halfway, but he's still the knight that saves her, but she's a little bit independent in her own right.
When Edward reaches her, he asks her what happens after the knight rescues her, and she responds, she rescues him right back and kisses him, which is cute, and that's basically the end, except then we have this guy walking across the street. His name is Happy Man, by the way, in the credits, and he says, welcome to Hollywood. What's your dream? Everybody comes here. This is Hollywood, land of dreams. Some dreams come true, some don't, but keep on dreamin'. This is Hollywood. Always time to dream, so keep on dreamin'. And then the credits roll.
Very kind of random. I feel like that was a feature of a lot of movies at the time, where they had this almost like final scene, some unrelated person saying something to kind of wrap it all up. I feel like that was a very 90s movie.
My memory could be wrong too, but I think he's also at the beginning of the movie saying the same thing. But we didn't notice because we hadn't seen the movie before, so we didn't know it was important and it would come back later. So that's the end of the movie. It ended really happy, unlike the original script, like we said. I thought it was a really hopeful, kind of nice ending here, and it was one of those cozy rom-coms where you just feel good at the end. There were never any remakes of this movie or spin-offs as far as I know, which is kind of rare because I feel like they're trying to remake everything nowadays. Did you hear that Freaky Friday 2 is coming out in August?
Heck yes. That sounds great. Is it with Lindsay Lohan and
Jamie Lee Curtis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, she's coming back?
Oh, you didn't know this? I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible fiance for not telling you.
My goodness.
Robert loves Freaky Friday, by the way.
Yeah, it was a great movie. 10 out of 10.
Well, in August, we're going to go see it in theaters, so be ready. But anyway, there was no spinoff for this movie, Pretty Woman, but there was a Broadway musical written, and both Gary Marshall and J.F. Lawton, the original screenwriter, were involved. But unfortunately, Gary Marshall passed away shortly into working on it, so he never got to see it. And this was in 2016 that he passed away.
Has the Broadway musical gone live before?
I think it opened in 2018, so it took a little while. And then I don't know if it's still running or not. I feel like somebody who lives in New York could probably give me a good answer on that. I feel like no, but maybe.
It seems like it would be a good movie to convert to a musical. You know, very similar to what seems like the opera something. You can do very dramatic highs
Oh,
and
yeah.
lows with this. Maybe a little bit better of something to convert to a musical than, say, I don't know, Mean Girls or something like that.
Rude. Wow, that was so rude. Don't listen to him, guys. Also, you know what the main hit of the musical should be?
Pretty Woman.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and thank you, Robert, for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I'm so happy that you did this with me, and you guys, Robert researched for this too, and he put a lot of effort into watching the movie and thinking about it and then looking up fun facts. And I just really appreciate that you put so much effort into this podcast episode, and you've been so supportive of the podcast behind the scenes this entire time. So thank you so much. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for marrying me, and thank you for having me. I've always wanted to be on this podcast, so it's fun to finally be able to get on it. I didn't realize how nerve-wracking it was and how difficult it actually is to be able to speak and not immediately say or duh or something like that. So really massive credit to you and Megan every week for doing this.
Nah, we just edit them all out. It's easy peasy.
That's the real trick. It's you get 100 different and the audience will never hear one.
Maybe they'll hear the occasional one. I really appreciate you welcoming Robert on the podcast this week. Let me know what you thought of having him on. He would probably love a little feedback.
Yeah, I would love to hear if you guys... I'm sorry, I'm invading your very feminine, happy energy space with my energy. So.
With cynicism.
With my love is dead and all that approach. But no, it was a very fun podcast. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you next time.
Bye.